Hi everyone, I am Jess. I am a product designer at Comcast Freewheel and a proud Pratt IXD alum. I'm really excited to share my journey since graduating and how I've been experimenting with AI to make my design work more efficient and more creative. So before we dive into AI, I just wanted to take you guys back a bit to where it all started and how I got into UX and all that fun stuff. So before I joined Freewheel, my path to product design was full of small but meaningful steps that led me here, and I want to walk you through those experiences that shaped my path, starting from my very first human factors class in college, where I learned what it really means to design for humans. And back then, I didn't even really know that UX design was a career path. I just knew that I loved understanding why people struggled with certain products and how simple tweaks could make experiences so much better. And that curiosity for me became the foundation for everything that came later. So after graduating, I worked as an account manager, but I quickly realized that it didn't align with what I wanted long term. So I would spend my evenings learning UX, and I even volunteered as a UX designer for a COVID-related startup project. It has since turned into something else. Like it was COVID, and then it switched into some sort of um, I think it had to do with cryptocurrency or something along those lines, which was a huge shift. So by late 2019, I knew that I needed to make a change, and I actually quit my job to study for the GRE and to prepare for UX master's programs, which was also one of the scariest but most defining decisions I've ever made. Soon after, I landed my first UX internship at a workout platform startup. And around that same time, this was like September, like the fall of 2020, I got my acceptance letter to Pratt. And that moment really validated the risks I had taken to pivot into design. It's actually really funny because I had studied so hard for the GRE. Like I had um, this full like schedule every single day that I try to stick to. I spent weekends doing practice tests and stressing over the math sections, only to realize that Pratt was one of the schools that didn't require the GRE in order for the application. But honestly, I think it just showed how determined I was to make this dream happen. So when I finally got my acceptance letter, I also found out I'd been awarded a scholarship around that time because I wasn't working. I didn't really have money to pay for master's programs. So this was a huge blessing for me. And yeah, that moment just felt like everything I'd been working toward was coming together. Like it was a clear sign that I was on the right path. And January 2021, I chose Pratt because it was close to home. So I'm a born and raised New Yorker. And it offered a strong information experience design program and one that blended research, design, and systems thinking. I also love that Pratt didn't just focus on how things look, but on how they work and why people experience them the way they do. And it really shaped how I think about design today. At Pratt, two projects really stood out. I don't know if you guys have taken this eye tracking study or the chatbot class. This is so long ago. I don't even remember their like specific names of the courses, but this first project was providing design recommendations for the Cooper Hewitt Design Museum's mobile site. We use eye tracking to see how people processed information, essentially like what caught their attention, what they ignored, and what confused them. And the second was Stupor. So that was like the title of our project, but it was for conversation design. I don't know if it's still called that way. It was so many years ago. And it taught me how to design conversational experiences and to think beyond screens, which is something that, like, as a product designer, you don't really get an opportunity to do so. But both projects helped me explore human-centered design in a hands-on way, and it really deepened my curiosity about how people interact with technology. So after that, I was ready to take everything I learned and apply it to the real world. So while completing my coursework, I interned at Freewheel as an associate UX designer. I was their first UX intern, which was pretty cool. But I basically focused on reusable components. And not that summer, the following summer, I spent a summer at GoPuff redesigning their onboarding experience for delivery drivers. And those internships really gave me a solid foundation where I was able to start connecting UX theory that I learned at Pratt to real product impact. At GoPuff, for example, we were redesigning the delivery driver onboarding flow because it existed essentially in a third-party platform, and they wanted to bring that here and into the platform so it was a more cohesive experience as opposed to having different touch points. And I actually got to test some of those prototypes and interview some of those drivers during their breaks while they were waiting to pick up deliveries. So I was able to go to, they have these like MFAs, they're called micro fulfillment, or sorry, MFCs, micro fulfillment centers, where that's essentially where all the drivers are picking up the food, all the snacks, whatever they're bringing to the receiving end. So yeah, it basically taught me how to be scrappy, but it taught me that good research doesn't need to be super fancy. It just needs to be intentional, and then you end up getting results either way. And I also realized, like, in those instances, it was just more natural for them to talk as opposed to just like sitting in like a formal interview room. So it was pretty cool. Um, and this is where my screen stops working. All right. So in January 2023, I joined Freewheel full time as a product designer. Um, so yeah, I finished in December 22, and then immediately the month after, I was able to join full time, which was really nice. That transition from intern to full time designer was really big. I suddenly owned projects end to end from research through execution, and it was both exciting and challenging, but I love being able to see my designs go live at scale. And I'll never forget some of the first projects that I fully led. All the engineers like just did not want to listen to what I had to say. Like they literally were like, no, like we know what's right. And that's essentially how it was going to be. Fast forward to today, I'm still working with some of those same engineers, and they became like some of my favorite teammates now. And they truly value my opinion when it comes to design. Like they'll message me one-on-one asking for my direction whenever they need design help. So from the time where I started to right now, I think I would say like we grew a pretty big way. And I'm super happy about that. And the last point, so fast forward to today, November 2025, which is where we are now. I'm still at Freewheel. I've shipped multiple features. Honestly, I can't even count. In my industry, because there's only so few designers, like you're working like on every single project essentially. It never seems to be that there's enough designers. There's always more PMs, more engineers, but never enough designers. And here I've led major redesigns, and currently I'm working on an API management platform that connects multiple of our platforms together. And it's essentially a role that brings together everything that I've learned, whether that be design, research, or collaboration, and increasingly AI assisted workflows. So, what exactly do I do today? And what have I learned along the way? Let me just take a little break with some water. This is a good segue. So let's dive into what my role looks like now and some of the biggest lessons I've learned in the field. So, as I've mentioned, At Comcast Freewheel, I'm a product designer on the streaming hub team. So we have a couple different teams. We've started to rename some of our products, but this is probably our biggest guess revenue driver out of all of our platforms. We have really big clients that join the platform. But essentially, what the Streaming Hub is that it is a central platform that helps publishers manage their streaming content and ad inventory. So yeah, like you're connecting multiple systems so publishers can track performance and make updates efficiently. One project that I'm especially proud of that I just completed recently as well was the creative redesign project. So in advertising, creatives are the actual ads, whether that be images, videos, or media assets that publishers run across their platforms, whether that be streaming platforms or even like actual TV, like the linear type of version of consuming advertising. Um, and before our redesign, our clients were using a legacy interface, and it made it very slow and cumbersome to review, approve, or reject these ads. And our goal was to transform the platform visually and functionally, moving to a new design system. We call it Circle. Circle V2 is where we're at, version 2. And it made interactions clearer and a lot more intuitive. We also introduced several key improvements. I'm not going to go down a list. There's just too many that have happened over the time we've been designing this, but um, some of those improvements included like streamlining the workflows that significantly increase the speed at which our clients can approve or reject ads. Um, we updated that visual language across the platform so users can navigate without any confusion. Some additional usability enhancements like bulk actions and clearer status indicators, which reduced errors and manual work. And after we started releasing that, like we're still releasing it, we did it in a phased approach because we kind of have, we don't have engineering capacity, unfortunately. So the impact was immediate from that first phase of the redesign release. Publishers could manage their ads faster with fewer mistakes and felt more confident in navigating the system as opposed to before. So this project, it really highlights my focus on efficiency, clarity, and scalability in design. And across the team, I work closely with PMs, engineers, and other designers to align priorities and to deliver solutions that are both functional and intuitive. And the fun stuff. So, one of the biggest lessons that I've learned is that design in the real world isn't linear. Sometimes there's no time for full user research or testing, so you really have to get creative in how you gather that information in order to inform your design. So, you're essentially like gathering insights from people across the org, and you kind of have to work with what you have. Like, honestly, there's so many projects where I start and I have so many gaps in my knowledge, but I end up eventually, like when I start continuing on and taking the next steps, that's when I start filling those knowledge gaps and start to understand it a little bit more. Um, Another thing I also learned is to detach emotionally from my work. I'm a very emotional person, so this was very hard for me at the beginning. I'm like, I don't understand, like this makes sense. And when I was getting that feedback, it was just a little too much. But um, this feedback is constant and it's not really about you or like your skills as a designer. Like it's more so about improving the product. So yeah, there's just being able to detach yourself helps a lot and you won't get upset as much. There also have been multiple times that I've worn multiple hats, whether that be designer, which is my main focus, researcher. We just recently got a UX researcher on the team, but before that, all these years, we didn't have anyone. So we continued doing the research, which was great, which is what we learned from Pratt. And I was equipped to run through a lot of those user research sessions. Um, and also, there are moments where collaboration mattered far more than perfection. Again, it was about releasing that product and getting initial feedback as opposed to creating something perfect. Like think like MVP, something super small that you can test with. And finally, advocating for design is a skill in itself. So you have to help others see the value behind good design decisions. Um, it's not always going to be automatic. I feel like still up to this day, um, it's really challenging. I had a conversation with one of my engineers about that creative redesign project where he was like, I don't understand why we need designers. Like I genuinely don't get it. Like we could do this, but as we started working with him, he's like, okay, I get it now. So those lessons came with their fair share of challenges, but also a lot of growth. And one of my biggest challenges has been realizing that design is only half of the job. The other half is that communication, that storytelling, and influencing decisions. So, in a fast-paced environment, priorities are constantly shifting, and sometimes what you design isn't what gets built. Again, this is where that detachment from your design and keeping that emotion separate helps a lot here. There's also the tension of collaboration. So everyone has design opinions, from engineers to PMs. Like people will literally provide me with mock-ups, and sometimes they go around us and they try to just implement it, which is a bit frustrating. So that's when your role becomes more about guiding as opposed to controlling. And over time, I've learned that the best designers measure the impact of their work. This is something that, as a junior designer, I don't think you really think about, but as you get to like mid, senior level, this is where it's like you really need to show the value of your work and the impact that that work is bringing. And the way to do that is to tie it to business outcomes and user needs. And that is how design earns its seat at the table. So, as I navigated those challenges, I started looking for new ways to work smarter and not harder. So, let me take another break before I go into AI. I feel like everyone's favorite topic. Um, so this is essentially where AI came in. I started exploring how AI could help me speed up my process, stay organized, and spend more time on creative problem solving, not necessarily to replace design, but to enhance it. And at first, I was very skeptical. I thought there's like no way that this can really help with UX. I'm just, what are we doing? Like, what is this? But once I started experimenting, I realized that it wasn't about replacing thinking, it was about amplifying it. And this is something that a lot of like product leaders within my company, they stress. Like it's not about replacing our thinking, it's just about getting to the outcome a lot faster than we were able to before. So I use AI mainly to work smarter across different stages of design. These are just a couple of them, but honestly, you can get so creative with this and really just you can get a lot out of it. So it helps speed up my research and synthesis by summarizing notes or transcripts to uncover patterns faster. It also helps me make sense of very dense PRDs from PMs. Like these PRDs aren't necessarily like designer friendly. These PRDs is essentially a document where I think it's more so, in my opinion, I think it's more so meant for engineers to understand. So obviously we kind of speak a different language in that sense. So I use AI to help me pull out the user problems, any requirements that exist on my end, and any particular dependencies. So when I'm designing, I also use it to plan information architecture. I know some of like the generative AI tools, like they don't really have that ability. Like ChatGPT doesn't have that ability to build a prototype, but I know Claude has that ability. So I'll get into that a little bit more. But in this way, like I'm making sure that I'm not missing any key steps or content. And as for UX copy, it helps me refine things like button states, empty states, and error messages so the tone feels more consistent with the rest of our platform. And overall, AI lets me focus on the creative and the strategic parts of my work, the things that humans should be doing. And again, this is pretty much what I've mentioned before, but this is what that looks like in practice. So I summarize interviews, I extract requirements from PRDs, and I even use AI to generate or refine user interview questions. Now it's a little bit different because we have that UX researcher, so they're able to help us through his knowledge to be able to create these a little bit under his own experience, which is really great. I also really love AI in the sense that it can quickly learn complex topics like APIs. So I can design a lot smarter without spending all those hours like reading technical docs. Like we just don't have time for that type of like deep level knowledge, like understanding it. So this helps me understand that like 80/20 rule. Um, and sometimes I'll even ask it to ask as a user persona. And this is more for like pressure testing, a flow or scenario. Oftentimes I'm also even like going back and forth with it. I'm like, hey, like this doesn't really make sense. Like, what about this? Like, what about this? Help me like try to explain some of like this rationale. And it's more so it gives me that feedback like back to me where I'm like, okay, like maybe I need to think about it a different way. Sometimes you don't have designers that are available to give you that feedback. So this is where it's just like kind of like a light feedback that can help you, understand whether you're going in the right direction. And I know it's not perfect, but it does spark a lot of ideas that I can validate a lot later through real research. And one thing I've learned is that AI is only as good as your prompts. So the key here is specificity. So the more context that you give and the more examples that you give, the better your results are. And essentially here it's all about iteration. So like design, you're iterating constantly to get that right outcome, um, get that perfect, not perfect solution necessarily in any case, but it just helps you get closer to that solution. So it's more about refining that prompt until you get the output that gets you closer to what you need. And with this, like prompting is a skill, and once you get really good at it, AI becomes your co-pilot. And the prompts that you see here on this image, if you can see it pretty well, this is one that I like to use, which is act as a UX researcher, analyzing interview notes, summarize key patterns and contradictions. Um, and then here I'll also either just copy a transcript from a recording that I have from that user interview. And it helps me a lot. It honestly like helps sift through that information and identify things and then just do that the same way across all the different interviews that I conduct. So I know it's very simple, but it helps me synthesize faster while still maintaining control over what type of interpretation essentially giving. So I have tried a bunch of AI tools. I recently did like a deep dive on those specialized AI tools and the Gen AI tools. Some are really great at that one specific task, like analyzing interviews, but not much else. General tools like ChatGPT, Copilot, and Claude. Of course, there are a lot other ones, but these are kind of the ones that I use. And they've become my go-tos because they're really flexible and they can really fit into almost any stage of my process. It just takes that creativity where it's like, what do you want to know? And again, like phrasing it back to the chatbot and seeing if they can essentially give you that information that you're looking for. Um, so that being said, depending on your use case, you might need different tools. These just happen to be the ones that fit into my workflow. Ultimately, the value isn't in the tool itself, it's in how I mentioned it's how you guide it. And I like to think of it in the same way that we think about Figma. The creativity doesn't come from the tool itself, it comes from how you're using it. Yeah. Um, some benefits that I've seen using AI in this way has had a big impact for me. It speeds up my prep, it helps me extract insights, it improves collaboration, and it makes iteration a lot faster. And again, AI is not replacing design. I know because I've literally tested in every like aspect. I've tested Lovable, I've tested all these products. It's just not quite there yet. Not saying that it's not going to get there at some point, but this is just how it is like currently. It more so is a way that is amplifying design. Um, and it handles that routine so I can really focus on creativity, strategy, like the big picture thinking and problem solving. And it's also helped me to become a lot more confident. So I'm going into meetings with PMs where it's like I already have a solid knowledge about the topic. And I can ask also the right questions to PMs if anything needs clarification. So again, I'm spending a lot less time on the repetitive tasks and more time thinking a bit more critically and creatively about the user experience. So, of course, with all that power comes great responsibility. I had to add this portion here. Um, But AI is supposed to be a partner, not the designer itself. So it should support your process and not necessarily drive it. It's also important to double check outputs because AI can actually introduce bias and inaccuracies. I'm sure some of you guys have heard that it can hallucinate, and that is absolutely true. So yeah, sometimes it's just check what you're getting from those outputs because they might not always be even like a valid like true thing. And another big one, because I've been seeing a lot of people like use it as a doctor, as a therapist, and whatnot. Honestly, I found so many uses for it. Be careful what data you're inputting. So many of these AI systems are using your content to train their models. So unless you're okay with that, unless you're okay with like personal sensitive information, um, avoid sharing that type of confidential or personally identifiable items. And in here, I'm like specifically saying because for my company, we're not allowed to put sensitive company information like PRDs and like to ChatGPT. We have our own specific um, kind of like model from Copilot where we could enter that sensitive information, but that's gated and the model doesn't train. So anyone who's using Copilot is unable to see the information that we are, other than the organization. Um, so yeah, don't get in trouble with your company because they know things. So yeah, I just wanted to mention that this like responsible use keeps these tools helpful and not harmful. And that is my journey from studying design at Pratt to integrating AI into my daily workflow. And I wanted to thank you guys so much for spending this Friday and listening to me. And I'd love to open it up to any questions that you guys may have.
Thank you so much, Jessica. This was wonderful. Like listening to your journey and also like listening to how a designer is looking at AI in their workflow. I think that's like kind of been the elephant in the room for all, like, especially for over the last few months, everyone's like, okay, how do we use it? How do we use it responsibly? So thank you so much for such valuable insights, for sharing your process so thoroughly. I think this is wonderful.
Yeah, I'm curious how you guys are using it at Pratt right now. I know I guess I kind of like missed the portion. I like finished Pratt basically before AI started becoming a thing. So I'm curious, like, are there any restrictions? Are you like encouraged to use it?
I think for us, it kind of depends on the professors. Some
Mhm.
of them encourage us to use it, but it's also like we have to mention that this is where we have used the support of AI. So acknowledging that we've used it in this particular space, etc. And with some professors, it depends. They're like, let's not use AI. Let's just like go do without it. So I think it depends on the course or like anything that you're doing. But as long as you like mention it and you call out that you've mentioned it in these areas. So I think for a practical ethnography class, we were like, you could maybe use it for like research synthesis, but then we had to like also mention it. So,
Right. That's cool. See, you're being ethical designers.
and also I think the conversational UX class that you were talking about, I took that class last semester. So to draft some of the utterances, we maybe drafted few ourselves first and then used AI to help us draft more utterances with the chatbot. So
Yeah, I feel like you can definitely get a lot faster. I remember it took us so long because we didn't have this AI. So it was just us like listing everything out on those Google Sheets and yeah, so Aisha, I think you have a question.
Hi, yes, I do. I was actually, I found the part that you mentioned about using AI for like information architecture, quite interesting. I've never, used it for that purpose, but I was just wondering like which tool you use, to kind of help you with that aspect.
Yeah, so like in those examples that I was using, I mainly use like the generative AI tools. So again, like I mentioned, like ChatGPT doesn't have the ability to actually create that prototype. Like they can't really create mock-ups, really honestly. Like I've tried and it's really funky. It more so like lists out the pages that we should have given the context. And then from there, I work from it. So it's literally just like text that they're providing me, but it helps give me some ideas about some things that I could include in that page, something that I wasn't able to consider. Again, like I haven't really touched upon the API manager project that I'm working on, but holy, like that's like a whole other like ballpark. And again, like we don't have that research. Like we didn't have the ability to speak to developers and like there's three different user types and then there's kind of like these like sub users for each of those users. So we really had to get scrappy and get that information other ways. So this is essentially like what we're doing. So again, you're not going to get those like the information architecture visually. It's more so like text, but I still think that you can do a lot with it and manipulate it to what you need.
Oh, wow, that's actually quite, it seems to be quite helpful,
Yeah.
definitely. I was also wondering, like, now that like Figma has like Figma Make, which is like their AI, I was just wondering, like, do you find yourself ever using it, in your projects, or like, kind of, if you do use it, then like, have you found it helpful for any specific, parts of your design or?
So I, again, because I love trying out all these tools and I'm just like, how do I speed up my process? Like I have tried it. I still don't think it's quite there. I know it has the ability to connect your design system, but even when I've connected my design system, it somehow messes it up. Like it can't take my design system and build something with that design system. So it's not really helpful for me. I think it's good for maybe like prototypes to validate something very, very quickly, but it's not going to give you that exact look that you need. So that's where it's a little bit tricky. Also, again, I think it's very slow. So as it's like forming it, like you sometimes have to wait like a good like couple of minutes before you get a result. And I feel like that can be time consuming. But I'm sure like people have used it. They've even tried it to create prototypes, but still it's just not quite there. And again, like not to say that it won't get there, but just at the moment I haven't really been using it and we have like access to it and everything, but yeah, it's just not that great.
Yeah, I had the same kind of experience with like the design system where like even if you keep trying to feed it, like it still creates screens that are like inconsistent.
Right.
And yeah, the same thing, like where it just takes forever to load. And I was just thinking maybe it was just me and like it's like I'm not prompting it correctly, but it's good to know that like it's not me, it's the tool.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely the tool.
I think we had a question in the chat about your experience that changed working with engineers, which is how were you able to gain the engineers' trust after experience, the with like your journey in 2 years at Comcast. So,
Yeah, so a little bit of background. So before, like I mentioned, like this, the design team is very small compared to um the amount of PMs we have, the amount of engineers we have. This was because my company was basically a more like engineering driven. Uh, back in the days when it was a startup, which was about maybe about like 15 years ago. Um, and a lot of those engineers were at the company like from the start, so they didn't I guess I could say like grow up with um having designers on the team. Designers started coming in a lot later. Um, but what helped is something that I did for the creative redesign project is bringing in the engineers like literally from the very beginning of your design process. And that was also something that we didn't do before. We always left engineers as like an afterthought. Again, it was just kind of like that handoff moment where it's like the design is done, that's it. Like now just go develop this. And I think there were missed opportunities there. So this project, I'm like from the very beginning, you guys get to hear the user feedback, user interviews, usability testing, everything that I did, I wanted them to hear about so they can stay informed. And that helped strengthen my relationship. And that's like where I mentioned now they just end up messaging me like directly on Slack, which is like, wow, like it's such an honor because they like I'm telling you, like they did not see the value in design. Like literally 2 years ago, they still thought they like knew better in certain instances when it came to design. And that was the challenging part for us, being able to exert our influence, but people didn't fully like felt like you were supposed to be there. So yeah, just helping and involve them in the very beginning, that will show and that will help strengthen that relationship. And honestly, just like leaning on them, like if there's anything, like if they see that you want to hear, like what are the technical constraints, they're going to be like, this person is our partner, like this person actually like cares about what we have to say. Um, so yeah.
okay, thank you for that. We had a few questions also come in as we sent out the registration form for the talk. So, one was about what were your job search strategies and how do you prepare for interviews? And, like, if you have any tips. And to add to that question, one of it was also how do you tailor your portfolio when applying to roles at, like, say, different companies, say, especially, say, with Comcast?
Mhm. So I can't really speak too much about the interview process because, as I said, like I was an intern and that role transitioned into full-time product designer. So there, I can't even really remember my interview process. Like it was so long ago. So I'm sorry, I can't answer that question. But in terms of tailoring um, your design role, this is something that you can do with AI. If this is a certain role, like just make sure you jot down all your experiences and see if they can use your experiences to tailor your resume for that particular role. Obviously, take a look through it. Maybe it might hallucinate, maybe it might give inaccurate information, but I think it's a start. And it'll help, again, like tailor that specifically to the role that you're applying for.
Thank you so much. And another question was any recommendations for someone pivoting into UX after having already had a separate design career in another field? Was like another question that came in.
I would say, honestly, if you guys can get internships as soon as possible, that will be the most valuable thing because at this point in time, I feel like there's been like a stall in hiring. There also has been a stall in the junior UX design position. So having those internships will speed up. You sometimes can honestly skip, like that's what I did. I skipped over the junior UX position and I just went straight from intern to mid-level product designer because I just had that link. Yeah, so honestly, if you guys can get internships like wherever you can, even if they're unpaid, like this will just show that you have that experience because yeah, it's just a tricky world that we're living in. So having that experience is what will help you stand out.
I feel like it's really hard to get an internship if you already have work experience. So
Mhm.
even though like um I'm in the master's program and stuff like that, like it just seems like I'm not I'm also not applicable to be like an intern.
Mhm. So in that sense, because you have already design experience, I wonder if you guys can apply for apprenticeships because that is another pathway. I know that apprenticeships are meant to help people who are in other careers pivot with essentially no design experience necessary. I don't really know that too many companies do it. I know Google, I think, has an apprenticeship program, and it really helps going like through that direction. Yeah, in terms of the internships, I know that they have like specific criteria where you need to be an undergrad, but it does help that you are in a master's program because you're like doing your education right now. Whereas for an internship, if you guys weren't doing your master's, and you were trying to apply for an internship, they wouldn't even consider you. So it helps that you have that like education that you're currently pursuing right now. It's really hard. Even back then in the day when I was getting into it, like 2019, 2020, I had to take those unpaid internships and they sucked. Like they were so bad, but eventually I got there. I know it's a long path, but if this is something that like you truly want to do, I feel like you'll get creative in the way that you get these positions. I don't know. I hope that helps.
That definitely does. And I think just looking at the time, if there's any last question that anyone has, you can either just unmute or like even put it on chat.
Also, feel free after this call if you guys just want to add me on LinkedIn and if you have any specific questions, I can help answer them. Yeah.
That sounds great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Jessica. Thank you so much for today. Such valuable insights.
Thank you guys. Yeah, I wish you guys the best of luck. I know, again, like I've mentioned, it's not an easy journey, but getting those experiences is what will help, again, like be able to get you into that field. So, yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Have
you
a good day
guys.
ahead.
Have a good Friday.